How's it going, Internet? Today we're going to talk about some inflation numbers. These are legit numbers coming out of estimates just this past month, and they're obviously based on the inflation numbers, annual spending data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. So these are official numbers, no fudging here. These are also being looked at by the analysts at Nerdwallet. And this is pretty interesting. They looked at how these numbers would compare to the 2020 when the pandemic began. So what's interesting about that is in 2020 was the last full year when inflation was relatively, they call it stable. In all of 2020, the American average household spent $61,300 on average. So this number includes everything from how you spend your money, from leisure to housing, food, any kind of entertainment, clothing, transportation, and essentially anything you can think of. They accounted for this, and that average was $61,300. In 2022, that number has shot up quite a bit. At the moment, in their latest estimates, they're looking at a number of 72,900, almost 73,000, and that's a difference of close to $12,000 at about 11,500. So 11,500 for the same goods, the same standard of living that we all had in 2020 when inflation was at 1.23%. So that 8.3% current inflation rate, looking at the previous 2020 at 1.23%, that difference is $11,500. And of course, these are average numbers. So according to Nerdwallet analysts, because of this average estimate, no one's going to fit exactly into these numbers, but it's just kind of an aggregated average. So those who earn and therefore spend more will see more dramatic increases in essentially the average cost of whatever they're spending their money on. And those who earn less and therefore spend less will see less of a jump in how much they're spending. So it's pretty interesting in the difference in how you feel versus your spending habits. So total monthly household expenditures are up roughly $961 according to the Nerdwallet, and while spending on groceries is up $101, that's still quite a bit for groceries. And of course, gasoline has risen quite a bit. And Nerdwallet notes that spending figures from 2020 were less than typical, given that C-19 restrictions meant that fewer people were commuting, forking out money on health, childcare, entertainment, and overall, people were spending less money. So that's something to take into account there, and that is a legitimate note to keep in mind. So it's a safe assumption that people will spend less in certain categories this year too. And that, of course, is because they want to spend or avoid high prices. So this screenshot is just an essential breakdown of some of the inflation numbers from 2018. You're looking at 2.4%. And then we go to 2019, and we look at a 1.81%. And then we look at 2020, a 1.23%. And 2021, a jump of 4.7%. What's interesting to note is from 2017 to 2020, it was either fairly flat or a slight decline. And that's pretty interesting. Here's another breakdown. This is in chart form. And this one goes back all the way to the 60s. And we can see inflation here in the early mid 70s to the early 80s when it was astronomically high. And ever since it got kind of fixed in the mid 80s, it's been relatively low overall. It's been low. And at times, looking at 2009 till about 2018, 19, well, 2020, it's relatively stable. Very, very low inflation rise. And that's pretty amazing to go for that long. So the U.S. government has done a great job. No matter who was in office from the roughly mid 80s up until 2020, it was pretty good. So you got to give them credit for that, right? And here's a breakdown from all the years, and it includes the annual changes. So roughly 2 to 3% since the 90s. I mean, that's pretty great. That's pretty good. So even though sometimes, the news or even the YouTubers or anyone else acts like doom and gloom, overall, the U.S. government has done a pretty tremendous job of containing any kind of inflation or hyperinflation. Everyone freaks out a little bit. That's because no one wants their buying power to go down. And this is kind of what we're starting to feel. And it doesn't matter what income bracket you're in, you are feeling these changes right now. I just want to say, smash the like, subscribe if you haven't, and please do provide any feedback. So let's take a really quick look at the United States Congress Joint Committee or Joint Economic Committee breakdown. So here it says the Joint Economic Committee Republicans. So this was put out by the Republicans. What I like about this is that they kind of break it down by the states. And that's pretty interesting. So for example, if you look at this map here, and I'll provide the link below, check it out, for whatever it's worth. And they break it down so by the states. For example, if you click on Colorado, it'll give you a certain state inflation rate. And then it'll give you the annualized household cost, okay, for that state. So 11,249 annualized increased cost for Colorado due to this inflation rate. And that is considerably higher than, let's say, the state of Tennessee, which is at 7,700, or Alabama at 7,300, with lower inflation rates. And that's what I like about this report. What's also interesting here is the whole map. What's also interesting is it says here that the families in the mountain states, the mountain western states, Arizona, Colorado, Idaho, Montana, Nevada, New Mexico, Utah, Wyoming, they're the ones facing the highest inflation rates. That's pretty interesting. And those are the states that are going to be paying essentially the most. Now, what's crazy about that is it actually says here that inflation costs were essentially unchanged during this past summer, but 28 states saw inflation costs rise, while 22 states saw inflation costs decrease. Very interesting. So they break it down by the states. Inflation costs decreased the most in Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Connecticut, and Illinois. Now, why would that be? I don't know. I really don't know. They don't provide any kind of explanation. So it also goes on to say families in Colorado facing the highest transportation inflation, probably gas costs. Gas is pretty high in Colorado and in the mountain states. And of course, California. California says it's facing the highest inflation food cost. It's pretty interesting. And they break down, here it is, and they claim that Texas is facing the highest energy inflation cost. So, take it for whatever, take it however you want to. It's pretty interesting. I will provide the link here. It says here, screenshot, each month coinciding with the Bureau of Labor Stats release of the Consumer Price Index, the Joint Economic Committee Republican State Inflation Tracker. So you can track this yourself. They estimate how much inflation increase costs for American families in each state. So this is actually something to keep an eye out on, especially if you're going to relocate anytime soon. Specifically, they ask essentially how much the average household will pay today, and can they maintain the same standard of living as they did, let's say, a year ago. That's obviously very, very important. So I thought this stuff was absolutely interesting, and the breakdown for per state is pretty useful to get a greater picture, greater totality of how people are doing. So let me know what you think. Pretty interesting, right? Anyways, smash the like, guys. Subscribe if you haven't, and I will see you in the next one.